Now, were you at all familiar with the old score by Carmen Dragon from the 1955 movie?
I wasn't. Even though I'm a science fiction buff, I had never seen the original film that came out in 1956. But when Phil talked about the movie and everything, I was just intrigued by the theme. I purposely avoided looking at the original until after I had finished the score.
Okay.
I didn't want to unconsciously or consciously be influenced by the previous score. Mm-hmm. When I did see the original after the thing was over, I was really impressed by it. I think that's just a classic science fiction movie, and I thought the Carmen Dragon score was terrific.
1978 also saw the release of your jazz album Soundings, and when you put the two of them together, they sound completely different. They couldn't be more different from each other, because a film score is something very precise and accurate, whereas jazz and a jazz album lives from improvisation. How did you as a composer deal with the lack of the ability to improvise in the score, and was that change difficult for you?
Well, it's true. I mean, both those things did occur in 1978. The Soundings album was an album way over on the opposite end of the musical spectrum, in that not only was it a jazz album that had improvisation in it, which virtually all jazz albums do, this was an album purely improvisational. There wasn't even a familiar tune or a prior composition that was first stated and then used as a springboard into improvisation. It was just totally what they call free improvisation. And so that contrasted with this incredibly meticulous process of film scoring, where I felt I was lucky if I got 2 minutes of music done per day. I mean, there are people who do this for a living that become so skilled at it that they can do much more than that. But for me, a neophyte going at it for the first time, particularly given the unusual complexities of this project in terms of integrating all of these different musical areas, if I got 2 minutes of music done in a day, I felt like, wow, I'd done a lot. Whereas, you go out and play a live concert, you play 2 45-minute sets in one night, and there's an hour and a half of music. So, I mean, it couldn't have been farther apart. And yet, really, at the heart of both projects was improvisation, because when I would begin to work on a cue, I would turn on the tape machine, I'd be watching the videotape, and I would start typically playing to that scene. And I might do that a number of times until a musical seed would generate that I would say, now that's something that could really underline this scene. And then I would take that germinal idea that had arisen from improvisation, and now I would start notating it or start recording it on multiple tracks of synthesizers and building it up.
So you really used improvisation even for the film score?
Absolutely. It was at the heart of what I was doing. I'm not typically a person who walks down the beach and composes music in his head and then comes home and notates it. There are composers who work that way. I typically work at a keyboard, and I start playing, and I start listening, and I begin to like certain things I'm doing, and then I start to blend them together, or mixing in them and developing them, and then gradually something begins to take shape. And then I might, in a more laborious compositional way, tweak it. But it comes from that germinal seed of improvisation.